Now, I just want you to familiarize yourself with what capped honey looks like.
Okay.
Because when you're going in and inspecting and before you harvest, you might end up accidentally harvesting capped brood. Hopefully not. Let's look at the difference.
Okay.
So capped honey is lighter, and it's very clean, very beautiful. And then for me, what I think is amazing is that 1 pound of honey comes to make 1 pound of honey. The honeybees have to visit 2 million flowers. And one bee is only going to make 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey throughout her life. That's all.
So, it's not a lot of honey.
I know. It makes you, when you spill honey or
I know, right? You're like, oh.
And, again, I think it's amazing that the honey contains all substance necessary to sustain life with vitamins and minerals and including water. Now, you asked about how bees make wax. So the bees will actually secrete the liquid wax from their underside in flakes, and you'll see it. I think it's the craziest sight.
Is that it right there? That's the flakes.
Yep.
Wow.
So that's how they make their wax. And then once it's ready, and then they'll pass it off and use it to shape. My first experience realizing how amazing bees were, because I worked in ortho in surgery. And so when your bone starts to bleed, they have to use a substance to help stop your bone from bleeding. And I'd worked when I did neuro and spine, but we used sterilized beeswax in surgery, and they still use it to this day. So, but it's bone wax is what it is, but it's a sterilized beeswax that they even use in surgery.
Wow.
You know about propolis,
right?
And that is what propolis looks like. It's all that resinous tree saps and everything that the bees will go and they'll gather, and that's what they use as their barrier for protection. And the podcast yesterday, I shared about the mouse and how the propolis was coated. So that's what it looks like. I always carry a jar with me, use my hive tool, scrape it, throw it in the jar. When I'm ready, I'll pour in my alcohol, and that is how I make my tincture.
Okay.
Simple as that. And if you can only get 100 proof alcohol.
Where do they get propolis?
All the tree resins.
The resin from the trees. That's right.
So, and sometimes the buds, like the cottonwood buds. And then they also make like a fermented, their pollen is packed and it's fermented. It's mixed with a bunch of the enzymes and they'll make a bread with it. So this is so good for their gut health. But you're going to find that there's so many different shades of pollen. And it depends on what source, where they're finding it from. So it's their art. It's going to be fun when you get to identify what actually, like what's in bloom, what does the pollen look like.
Right.
And then I wanted to show what a day-old egg looks like. So it's very tiny. Typically, if the egg is nice and centered and a single egg, then you know that the queen is laying. Sometimes if it's a new queen, it might be a little bit wonky, but she'll figure it out. If you have multiple eggs in that cell and no queen, then you have a laying worker. And that'll be a little bit of a pickle. Hopefully you won't have to deal with that. I've actually only dealt with it one time.
Okay. So it's not super common.
It's not, as long as your queen is doing the thing, what she needs to do.
Right.
And then this is what larva looks like in a cell. Nice,
you
shiny,
can see it.
white, clean. And then the cap is a little bit darker versus what honeycomb looks like. And when we get into the colony, you'll see it a little bit better.
Okay. So this is the larva, and then this is capped.
Yes, capped brood. So
and that's like yellow.
Yeah.
Thicker,
darker, can't see through it.
Okay.
Now, a frame of brood and worker brood, so male brood and female brood, I want you to kind of be able to understand what it looks like. The male bees, the drone, are a little bit bigger. So their brood,
they're the ones that are kind of popping out.
They look like it's puffy, versus the worker bees. So that is something to kind of just visually understand, like, so you know what's happening. Like, you know how many. You might see swarm cells. So a swarm is where the bees will decide that it's time to naturally split. So they'll create a new queen.
Okay.
Her cell will be underneath on the bottom, typically.
So this right here?
Yep. So pretty much all of
Those
these
are swarm.
Typically, if I find them on the bottom like that, then I know, okay, they're getting
You're
ready
gonna
to swarm.
split.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what would you do? Would you like set out the box and make sure that
I would pull that frame and put her in a
Oh.
nuke box.
You would just do it yourself.
I would just naturally do it.
Okay.
And
on that frame would have the worker bees
yep,
and all the
has
other
everything.
things that they
I might
need
pull a few more frames of like
just to
pollen
have-
and nectar. Yeah,
to
just
have
to
some
have
stuff in there for them. Oh, okay.
That's an easy way to do it, but I only do that when it's a swarm cell.
When you know for
when
sure.
I know it's a swarm cell.
Okay.
There's other cells that a queen will be in the making, which
Okay.
is an emergency queen cell.
cell.
So
Okay.
that's not exactly thought after. That's a quick, like, we're going to make a queen. Here's an egg. It's going to be here. An emergency queen is if you have no queen, if something happened to her and they needed to make a new queen. I don't do anything at that point. I
Okay.
just let them do what they're
You
supposed
kind
to
of
do.
just check in on it.
That's it. Not even.
Okay.
I'm just like, you're good. You're fine. You're going to make a new queen. Give them a couple weeks. They'll figure it out. I don't pull these cells, and I do not destroy them.
Okay. Do some people destroy them?
Some people do. Some people will destroy a swarm cell.
Okay.
You know, if they don't want their queen, if they don't want it to swarm.
If they don't want that.
Yeah, and there's a chance that we might see a swarm cell in those nuke boxes. We'll see.
Okay.
So we'll look and decide what we got to do then.
Right. Okay.
Then there's the supersedure cell. That is a thoughtful way of them making a queen. They know that their queen is failing and they need to make a new queen.
Okay.
So when
and then
that
what happens
happens,
to the queen that's in there?
when it's time,
make
they'll
sure she's
dispatch
gone.
her.
Okay.
Now those are typically kind of in the center of the frame. Versus
The supersedure cells. Okay.
An emergency could be anywhere pretty much.
Right.
Supersedures in the center, swarm
Swarms
is
at the
kind
bottom.
of typically on the bottom, and sometimes at the very top if there's another box on
Okay.
top. That is good to kind of visually be aware.